Good evening and welcome to Drew's Book Reviews. So today I am reviewing the whole Pathfinder series by Orson Scott Card, which I just finished. I've just finished the third book in the series, actually, but I'm going to do the whole series. So the first book was Pathfinder for the first book. This is a trilogy. The second book we have in the series is titled Runes. And finally, the third book in the series, Visitors. Now, the reason I'm doing the whole series is because I actually first read the Pathfinder series, or started reading it when it was first published way back in 2010. It's been a long time since I got to reading the final volume of this trilogy. So, as I haven't reviewed them before, either in writing or in video, I'm just going to review the whole series. So just to start out, the whole premise behind the series is that Earth has sent this colony ship to this new world which they wish to colonize. Now, we had to colonize another world because of a near miss of a comet that nearly crashed into the Earth, and mankind's like, we gotta save ourselves from extinction and start colonizing other worlds. So what they do is they set out and they launch this spacecraft to colonize other worlds. But the spacecraft, it's powered or designed to essentially warp through space-time as it travels to these far distant worlds and to colonize other worlds. So what happens is, when it reaches the new world, which is called Garden, the ship essentially fractures space-time and splits into 19 different versions of itself. In the end, there actually ends up being 20 ships, but I'll get to that extra ship in a little bit here. So 19 different versions of itself, all with identical copies of everybody that was ever on board this ship, fracturing it into 19 different timelines, 19 different sets of colonists, 19 different ships. And what happens is it crash lands onto this new world Garden. And then the crashes in the present, and then in the process of crashing in the present, it actually flings everybody back 11,191 years into the past. And as it crashes onto this new planet of Garden, it creates these different zones within the world that are referred to as the different folds. And basically, they're all protected by these fold walls, which are like this, some kind of magical technological barrier that prevents people from crossing. So the planet's been divided into 19 different zones. Each zone is where one of these ships had crashed. And for the next 11,191 years, the people of these different zones have no contact with each other. And essentially what we see is the evolution of society in 19 unique and independent ways, as the colonists, who don't even know of each other's existence as time progresses, begins to become different nationalities, different peoples, different evolutions, different cultures. It's a really interesting, fascinating idea. I actually really like the way that this plays out. Now, our main character, who goes by the name of Rig, he has inherited this unique ability called pathfinding. But what he's doing is, actually, before I get into what this ability is, tell a little bit about Rig. So essentially, he was raised by his father, who taught him everything he knew. He's like a woodsman. He learned how to live off the land. Never knew his mother, who she was, and learned everything he could possibly know from his father, who turns out to be this what's called an expendable, which is basically one of the robotic people that was on these ships that got duplicated when it split into 19 different versions of the same ship and all of its people, which of course he later finds out in the storyline, which of course leads to some interesting events, and the realities, as his entire perspective on the reality of existence is shattered and changes as he learns more and more. What's really interesting about Rig is he is a pathfinder. So what that means, he can literally see people's path and passage through time. He could see, it's like a trail left behind, and he can see where they've been, where they've gone, and he could follow them back through time and literally time travel, so he could latch onto their path and follow them back to the past, and then he could latch forward onto the future to where he's been in the future as well as he follows people's paths through time. But he's not the only one with this ability as well. His buddy Umbo also has time shifting abilities. I guess the best way to explain it, or pathfinding abilities. But each one presents itself in a unique way. Param, who is another one of the characters who is also a pathfinder in these books. She's really interesting in that she effectively splices time. She doesn't see the past, but more accurately, she hears the past. Her process is that she could identify these paths through time by literally hearing where people have been and where they're going. But she also has this unique ability to splice time, so she can move through time at a faster rate or slower rate than others, effectively rendering herself invisible because she's never in the same moment as anybody else, so nobody can see her, which makes for a really unique ability. I really like that aspect of it. Well, the interesting thing with this book, so we're talking about quantum mechanics and time travel, and this whole book series is this whole series is just filled with these paradoxes all throughout the book, things that can't be but are, and it's just crazy. Like, for example, there's the character Rig. He ends up killing one of the other characters because he thinks it's the only way to save his world. But then he realizes that was a mistake and that can't save the world but will doom the world. And so he goes back in time to prevent himself from killing this character that he killed. So he actually kills somebody, but not killed them. And now there's two of them. There is the Rig that killed the character, who isn't actually dead because he stopped himself from killing this other character. So it's all paradoxical and confusing the heck out of it. Because what they soon discover is that they have to go back in time, but in a very interesting fashion. You see, it is the coming of the ship from Earth that destroys the world of Garden. But it is them that originally came to Garden on the ship to begin with and got flung back 11,191 years. So what they have to do is now they've reached the point where the ship from Earth is now coming, and they have to prevent the ship from coming in order to save the world. But it was the initial sending or arrival of the ship that destroyed the world. So it's all completely crazy and weird, and it was in the destruction of this world that caused their world to exist to begin with. In order to prevent that, they have to stop the ship from coming, which would stop the world from being created, but will simultaneously save the world. It's all really twisted and convoluted. But that's what makes it so interesting. That's what makes it so awesome. Because these paradoxes in temporal and time travel, I love it. It's just an amazing way to write a story, because it's when you have these kind of paradoxes in there that really keep the reader interested and say, what the heck's going on? How can this be? In order to go back to Earth and prevent the initial launch of this ship that comes to destroy their world, they have to literally latch onto a reverse time flow, reverse the flow of time, and ride the ship that arrived at Garden back to Earth to prevent it from coming in the first place. It's really crazy and messed up. So that's just completely insane. Now, one of the other really interesting things about this series of books is specifically the number of years that this colony ship got thrown back into the past as it crash landed on the world of Garden. Specifically, 11,191 years. Now, that's not just a random made-up number. Anybody who's even the least bit familiar with numerology when it comes to the kind of occult or hidden knowledge or dark magic, so to speak, will know that 11,191, the 1, 1, 9, and 1 add up to the number 13, which has significance within the worlds of numerology. Now, this is a really interesting aspect of that, in that Orson Scott Card, when he wrote this, he specifically chose the number 11,191. I really can't see this, and from everything I've read from Orson Scott Card and all the other books, it's not simply coincidence that he picked that specific number as a result. And this is the first time I've come across this number in books. There's been a lot of literature that I've read where 11,191 has been the number that's been chosen. There have been many other fantasy books that have used the same number. And it's certainly not coincidence. It was very intentional. And I find that a really interesting aspect, because if there's one thing Orson Scott Card is really good at, it's at delving into the mysteries of humanity. And he's written on both dark or occult themes, and he's done that before. And so it's no coincidence that he chose 11,191, or also known as 13 in numerology, when writing this book. And that's really something that's interesting. One of the other areas I found really fascinating about this series is the idea of what we see with the different wall folds or regions of this planet of Garden is the 19 separate timelines of humanity that this world was divided into. So each wall fold has a completely separate timeline and evolution of human society and culture, which is absolutely fascinating, because the book does get a little bit into this, in which one of our characters, Rig. Now, as I mentioned before, there ended up being two different Rigs. One adopted the name Noxon to separate himself from the original Rig. And Noxon is the one that took that backward time travel, hitching onto the reverse time stream on the ship back to Earth. But Rig stayed on Garden, so the original Rig. And as we're going through the story, he starts exploring the other wall folds. He starts seeing how they've developed and their culture. And it's really interesting to see that. Now, it didn't go through all 19 of these separate timelines and regions of the planet Garden. I really wish it had, and I think maybe it could have been a very interesting series of books. In fact, I think there's a lot of potential in that, where Orson Scott Card could have very easily written a separate book focusing on a separate one of these separate timelines of the world of Garden, or separate regions and societal regions, which are effectively like a planet unto itself, a whole culture unto itself. I think he could have written 19 different books just focusing on that alone, one book for each area. I would have loved to get into that, but he uses that element of the story to really kind of explore the history of humanity and the cultural history of the global peoples, everything from slavery to warfare to politics, to love, to human behaviors at their very root. And that's really something that Orson Scott Card has done phenomenally well in all of his books, not just the Pathfinder series. I think this is a fantastic read and just really an overall excellent series, and I would highly recommend it to everyone. So definitely do not miss out on the Pathfinder series. Absolutely check it out. Fantastic series. And it's just good. I mean, Orson Scott Card is a good writer. I don't think I've read anything by him I didn't like. You gotta check it out. Just fantastic. So again, as always, thanks for watching. And for some more of my video and written reviews, you can go to andrewsbookreviews.wordpress.com. Now, up next, I will be starting something new. I usually don't read a lot of books based off of TV shows or movies. Usually it's the movies I watch based off the books, but I decided I'm going to delve into the Star Wars book universe. I'm going to check this out. Never read any Star Wars books, although I've seen so many people reading them. They tell me good things about them, so I'm going to check it out. So this will be Book 1, Jedi Search, coming up in the next book review. So be sure to tune in and check that out. And again, as always, andrewsbookreviews.wordpress.com. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you've enjoyed the review. Thanks again, and don't forget to comment below. Bye.